What's Penn State's defense under the direction of Tom Allen going to look like in 2024? Let's talk to a former Penn State linebacker to find out just that.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Penn State fans? That is right. You are Locked On Nittany Lions. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, bringing you all things Penn State sports coverage and analysis. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked On. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed with just a $5 money line bet. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And it is truly a privilege. 203 total tackles, donning that number 11 during his time at Penn State, played linebacker in the NFL, now co-host of The Pocket with former Penn State quarterback Christian Hackenberg, and that is Brandon Bell. Brandon, thank you so much for the time today.
No problem, man. I appreciate you. As we spoke off cam, it's been a little bit overdue. It was a long season, really hectic. But glad I'm here. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule and what you do with your podcast and your show as well. Again, The Pocket, part of State Media. They do Penn State coverage as well. All of their socials will be linked in the description, along with where you can keep up with Locked On Nittany Lions. So, Brandon, Penn State is going to have a new defensive look, and you wearing number 11, being a captain, being an anchor on those Penn State defenses. We'll talk about Deion Barnes as well and where you think Penn State should be in it, ranked, and what tier they should be going into 2024. But part of that change and part of where you would assess them has to do with the defense. So Tom Allen comes in, he's aggressive. I've called him a mastermind because he does know defenses, even though people don't really give him enough credit for what happened at Indiana. He's still, at his heart and soul, a defensive guy like Manny Diaz. So when you see Tom Allen taking over for Manny Diaz, do you think he'll embrace that similar style of defense that Diaz did? Or do you think he's going to have something else planned? And then based on some of the personnel that's also changed as well, because you lose Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, guys like Curtis Jacobs, Kalen King. It's going to be a lot to replace, but what is your initial take on how Tom Allen can approach this?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to see kind of what we get in spring ball. I hope to really get a chance to get up there, get some eyes, and kind of be more in the weeds of what's going on. But I will not expect too close as an approach from Manny Diaz. I think what Manny brought to the table was a very kind of niche, mentality that not everyone can do, even if they want, And I expect, Coach Allen has been coaching, for a good while here. I don't think he's going to bring his own style, his own creativity. Yeah. And it'll be aggressive, as you said. He's not going to sit there and, let offenses attack him. But I think it won't be the same level of aggressiveness, which, in fairness, I'm kind of more of a fan of, letting guys get settled a little bit, not necessarily bringing pressure every single down. But looking forward to kind of seeing guys read and react a little more. I'm not sure if that's what we'll get, but I'm looking forward to just a pro approach, which I think will be similar to what Manny Diaz brought, as we only heard good things from, when his departure, guys sending their respects to him, which is a big deal. That means he was respected in the building, in the locker room. And, there's not much more important than that, anything more important than that. So I would expect the same, pro approach to everything. And, as a former head coach as well, it's just kind of those are the things you need when it comes down to the execution on Saturdays. I don't really want to get too caught up in who is blitzing and this and that, but whatever he decides to do, will it be executed, pristinely? That's the important part.
How much does Penn State's current personnel, as we sit here today, this is being recorded on Wednesday, January 10th, a day after your birthday, actually. Happy birthday, belated birthday, Brandon. But the current personnel that Penn State has, a lot of turnover at cornerback. You're losing multi-year starters, all three of them at each defensive back spot. And I'm not saying that Zion Tracy and Elliott Washington might not necessarily be ready, but there's certainly going to be a steep learning curve since they're first-year starters and only sophomores. And King Mack can be in that conversation as well. We're waiting on that confirmation. The projections say Jalen Kimber and AJ Harris come to Penn State, but it leads me to believe that with what Penn State has currently, so let's take Harris and Kimber out of the equation, even if they bring them in, because they're still going to have to learn all of the Penn State way and the defensive system.
Yeah.
Would Penn State almost benefit from running more of a 4-2-5, where they have Kobe King and Abdul Carter as the linebackers, and then running three safeties, because you have so much talent with Jalen Reed, KJ Winston, who's being talked about now as a future first-round pick, and then don't forget about Zachy Wheatley, Mr. Turnover King.
Yeah.
So could Penn State end up running a 4-2-5 instead?
I think that's definitely realistic. And even outside of just, what's on the current roster, just in the landscape of college football and football in general, having that extra DB is kind of, I'm not going to say necessary, but it makes a lot of sense when you look at the opposing offenses, besides, a Michigan. And even though they throw sets out there that still favor having a nickel out there. So I would expect to see a lot of speed as we've seen with Penn State defense over the last few years. And that comes in the position of a safety or a corner. And I've only heard great things about the Elliott kid. I think he may be the fastest on the roster. Yeah. So, I'm not sure how much experience he has inside, but that's something they could look at. I wanted to bring up too Cam Miller, who played a bunch this year. Great size. I look forward to seeing him out there. I see him more as an outside corner, as we've seen, a little bit taller, more size and length to him. But any of those guys can jump inside, and I think whether it's a safety or a corner, I do believe I see a little bit more of that 4-2-5 that you say.
And with all those teams coming in from the Pac-12, Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, you're going to have to adjust your defense. Okay. Yeah. The days of playing Illinois and scheming for just them are over. And I think it's important with, just as Andy Kotelnicki is going to have a multiple offensive system, I feel like Tom Allen's going to have the same thing. And I look for guys like Abdul Carter, who wears number 11, like yourself did, benefiting the most. And when you look at what Tom Allen did as a head coach at Indiana for a number of years, it's not like he was there for 2 years and then was cast off. He was there for 7 years took over as the defensive coordinator and then the head coach for multiple years. And what was consistent about a Tom Allen defense was that there was always that one linebacker that really stood out. So it's kind of fitting that Tom Allen's going to bring that element, and then Penn State already has a number 11, whoever that is, flying all around, carrying on that legacy. Is when you look at this new Penn State defense in 2024, does Abdul Carter, is he the first guy that comes to mind who can even take a further step with what already he's accomplished? What other players are you seeing that you say, yeah, he's going to be a star because of Tom Allen and what this Penn State defense will look like next season?
I think definitely you have to start with Abdul Carter. I mean, you said it right there. He's ascended since he stepped on campus, which is what you see out of a potential, first round pick. And so, I think we're all expecting him to take an even further leap. It may be a tall task, but I mean, if anyone's going to do it, has the talent, the motor, and everything that you want out of a guy, it's got to be him. And I think he kind of wants that for himself. He wants to put the load on his shoulders and go out there and be the leader and make the big plays. So definitely looking forward to that. And I'm sure, like we said, with Coach Allen's, history and knowledge, it will, a new coordinator in your third year isn't necessarily ideal, but hopefully those guys can connect in this offseason. And Abdul, along with Kobe King and Dom DeLuca, I was going to start with the LBs. Actually, I know you mentioned more of a 4-2-5, but I would like to see a little bit more Dom out there. A little bit more of an undersized backer, so he plays in that space role. But, I think he's got guts out there. You have to put him in opportune positions, though. I will say that. But, Kobe King as well. All these guys can just soak up as much game and knowledge from Coach Allen before spring ball and the winter workouts. Right now, hopefully he's on campus and already and kind of just get into the book and learn each other. Similar, I know we all talk about the offensive coordinator and the quarterback, right? Those guys being on the same page, which obviously is ultimately very important. But Same goes for defense and the play callers and the linebackers and the safeties. Talk about all these guys being on one tether, being able to move around and be on the same accord will be, ultra, pertinent for this upcoming season. And then some of the young guys, I mean, I'm looking at Tony Rojas, got a lot of tick this year as well. Great size, great speed. I'm looking for him to take a jump too. Like we said, we'll see how much, kind of opportunity is there, but we'll see. And Keon Wiley got a lot of tick too. I hear a lot of good praise about this kid too. He's pretty sure he's a Philly kid, Emotep. I know we're talking about Deion later, but I think he's got some guts to him, some dog, a little something to him when I see him out there. So I think when Coach Allen gets in the building, he'll have his hands full as far as like talent to, be a puppet master with and formulate his scheme and whatever his ideals are for this defense. So I'm not too concerned, even with the young DBs, I'm not too concerned. I have a lot of confidence in these guys. And I know Coach Allen will come in along with Coach Smith and Deion and everyone else that are so great. That's another thing. I don't think too much about the DBs because I know we got Coach Schmitty back there that's going to get these guys right and has been and will continue to build them mentally and physically to get the job done.
And as you mentioned, Deion Barnes, he's one of the consistents on this defensive staff because Manny Diaz does take the head coaching job at Duke, but Barnes in just one season has ascended into the conversation as the best defensive line coach in college football. We're going to discuss on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It is easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs, then add your job in the purple hiring frame to let people know that you are in fact hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and then ultimately hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And the Locked On Podcast Network is proud of this one. Making history, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows covering each and every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. It's crazy. In 1 year's time, Deion Barnes goes from a graduate assistant to taking over as the full-time defensive line coach and makes a huge impact in recruiting. And I'm talking about not only the high school players that he's been able to get commit, but retaining guys who seem like they were headed off to the NFL. Hakeem Beamon and Devon Elise, I think they have a future in the NFL. So that's why I was a little surprised and just kind of hearing from them in post-practice interviews that it seemed like they had outgrown college football, but that's part of the challenge now, re-recruiting your own players. And Deion Barnes, who has, yes, been on staff for the longest time, but now working a little more directly with them and was able to convince them and say, it's more of a benefit for you to come back. And I think that's very telling, Brandon, about just what he's been able to accomplish in 1 year's time. So yes, I put him, it's tough to say to compare everybody across the country, but I would argue with what he's done at the high school level, getting those recruits, consistent 4 stars, right, across the board, guys that were targeted by SEC schools, fellow Big Ten schools, and able to fend them off. And he won just about every single recruiting battle that Penn State was keen on getting. So Deion Barnes, I would argue, is definitely a top 5 defensive line coach in college football right now, Brandon. And you, a former teammate for 2 years with him, so you know him very well. What is it about Deion that has put him in the spot to succeed early on in his coaching career?
Man, I said it when Penn State first elevated him to, official assistant coach as a D-line coach. It was one of the best moves they could have made, for the foreseeable future for a long time in my book.
Yeah.
I'm glad that was able to happen. And if somehow he was able to get out of that building, it would have been a huge, huge mistake. But obviously that didn't happen. And I'm glad he's there because what sets him apart, I believe, is Deion. One, he's a Philly guy. And anyone that knows any Philly guy is a real true and through Philly guy. He's no kind of nonsense, hard nosed, blue collar, whatever you want to call it, type of coaching guy. And that's as a D-line coach, that's literally kind of the potions that you want to build a D lineman out of. And on top of that, he's not too far removed from being these kids, coming out of high school, being, stepping on campus and being a freshman All-American, putting your nose to the ground and going to work, because that's what he's all about, is putting the work in, and everything else will fall in place. And then having NFL aspirations and being the best D lineman, DN, whatever player you can be. So when you put all that combination together, you get this kind of result. And I only see it, continuing to ascend. Sooner or later, I mean, he'll be one of the coaches that are getting, calls. I'm not sure if it's not happening already. Who knows? But calls and emails about, vacancies opening up around the country. So I'm excited for him to watch his future, because if he's not the best now, which, he's fairly new, but I'll give my guys props. But he will be in the foreseeable future for sure. I'd bet anyone against that.
What can you, from what you know and what you know personally about playing alongside Deion Barnes, what is it that these players are? It feels too easy. It feels easy to be able to connect with him, to say, yes, I want to play. I want to play for you as my defensive line coach for the next 3 to 4 years potentially at the college football level, and I trust you to take me to the next level in my playing career. What does Coach Barnes do? What does he say to them that just resonates with any of these players?
I think in a world of college football as it is today, which we know it's getting, some say, wacky, and all the distractions, whatever you may call it, but a lot of kids, the kids that we want at Penn State, I think, they want authenticity, which is hard to kind of see through in the recruiting process, because obviously we all want you, we're throwing this at you, blah, blah, blah. I think what kids see out of Deion, which is just who he is authenticity. Like I said, he's going to be who he is. He's not going to sell you one side of him, and when you get on campus, it's this. It's, hey, I'm Deion. Obviously, I'm not in these home calls, but hey, I'm Deion. You want to be great? I can help you be great. Let's get to work. Come here. We can do this. The guy wore no gloves. I said this before. The guy wore no gloves as a player. I remember seeing this as a young buck. And sometimes I wore no gloves, but I still had tape around my fingers. No gloves. And you know how cold it can get. I've never seen him wear gloves. So if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about your D-line coach, that's who Deion Barnes is.
Now it's going to be tough to measure up to this past defensive line, especially when you lead the nation in sacks and you lead the nation in pressure rate. And I know part of that had to do with scheme for Manny Diaz. And I'm not saying that Penn State can't replicate some of that, because you have a lot of talent coming back. Denai Dennis Sutton's going to be going into his third year, and he has to take the reins from Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac. And of course, don't forget about Zariah Fisher, Amin Vanover. But getting those guys, Ellies and Beeman, back in the middle to go along with Zane Durant, and then you have all of these freshmen coming in. A lot of them project as defensive tackles. I don't think all of them will play right away. I look to guys like, now I think Liam Andrews is somebody that could see snaps early, and now, especially since he's enrolled early, could see some playing time and probably shed that red shirt and play as a true freshman, because he is that talented and he already has the size to go. Part of this is size and development. You can't just throw someone who's undersized out there. And I think James Franklin said it, the tight ends red shirt typically, because they come in at about 210, 200 pounds flat, and then they got to take on 260-pound Denai Dennis Sutton types. But
trust me, I know all about that.
Yeah.
I came in at the time I came in, I was number 2 in the depth chart, maybe 220 soaking wet. So I know all about that.
Right, exactly. So Penn State has veterans to not take too much of a step back here. And I'd argue there's potential to still live up to being the number one team against rush in terms of yards per carry, right? You bring back the defensive tackles are a big part of that. And there was all this criticism, well, they're undersized, they can't really play. And Penn State took that personally and went from, yes, a run defense that was a little mediocre, was a little questionable, and they became the number one run defense in the entire country in one season's time. And now you're bringing back players that were a part of that. So I think Penn State's defensive line can be just as good, if not better, especially with Deion Barnes going into his second full season, now that he's probably learned some things and can change his approach here and there.
For sure, definitely. And I mean, I'd say the expectation remains the same, regardless of who's there, who's not there. And obviously bringing two interior guys, vets back, that's a big deal, will make a difference. But the guys on the outside, you mentioned some, Vanovers, even Jamil Lyons. I like this kid a lot too. Whoever it may be, I know Deion is also getting their mental right throughout this past 2 years about just being ready to take on this moment, when opportunity comes. And I'm sure this offseason will be, the DN competition will be as high as it's ever been at Penn State to see who's going to, get the majority of the snaps, who's going to be the starter. I think there'll be a good rotation, but, I think that's the part that Deion also brings is just that dog mentality, that no glove mentality of like, hey, you want to be a guy on this edge that, you just seen two guys make plays in big moments. The guys that get their name on the highlight, who to watch for on the defense. You can be one of those guys. Got to put the work in and then obviously go out there and make plays when the lights are on. So I think once you said the size and the talent, we definitely have on the roster. Just going out there and then executing and, being smart and making the right plays.
It's a lot of it's dependent on Dennis Sutton truly taking that next step, because Chop Robinson could be a top 10 pick. And I think once he goes through the combine and the pro day, scouts will realize, okay, there's no way we can't take no later than the 15th pick. I think he goes at a minimum top 15. So somebody's got to take that up. And I think Dennis Sutton truly has the potential. And I don't know that enough people are giving him credit to this point to be that all-intensive pass rusher that, like Chop Robinson, can play over the center in special defensive packages, can line up in any technique across the line of scrimmage there. But that's what, when I look at, yes, they have the depth still at defensive tackle, but you need that game changer, that game wrecker, and that's Dennis Sutton.
I think it reminds me of and there's no harm on him. It's just because he had two big names, great players ahead of him these last 2 years. It reminds me of a Chase Young situation at Ohio State. Before he became Chase Young, the guy, don't get me wrong, he was a big time recruit as well, coming out of Matha. But I mean, he had two first round pick guys in front of him as well. The Bosa brothers. I'm forgetting his name. I actually played with him in Cincy. Oh man,
is Sam Hubbard?
Hubbard, yeah, my guy Hubbard. Yeah, Sam Hubbard. I don't think he was first round, but hell of a player himself. So I think this will be the year that Dennis becomes a household name, to say, and like you said, to step up and be that next, guy that gets his name in the impact players on defense type of situation. And he has all the size and athletic ability to be another first round guy, which I believe he will be. So once again, put the work in, go out there and execute, and it'll all fall into place. I mean, we've seen the plays from him already. High motor, chasing down guys from the backside. I mean, mammoth of a human being. Once he gets his pass rush a little honed in more, it's the sky's the limit for him as well.
We've talked a lot about defense in these first two segments, Brandon. Now just kind of big picture overall, where does Penn State stand in the expanded Big Ten, but also in the country? Some places have them firmly in the top 10. Others have them outside of the top 15. You and I are going to chat where we would have Penn State to start going into the 2024 season, coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, the official sports book of Locked On. The NFL regular season has come to a close, but the playoffs have begun, and there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 money line bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app are super easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like same game parlays. Find bets in the new Explore tab, and you can even make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays. So the work's already done for you. You can tail your favorite bets that you like, and there's so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make your first bet a layup. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. And in this final segment, before we get to Penn State and where they should be going into the 2024 season, remember to support both channels, State Media and Locked On Nittany Lions. Socials will be linked in the description for all the latest analysis around Penn State football and so much more. Penn State is in an interesting spot because they've had a lot of turnover, but aside from maybe the secondary a little bit, because that needs some reinforcement, it's been good turnover. Andy Konelnicki is a good get. I think great get, because Penn State was able to fend off the likes of Oklahoma. So he was a sought-after candidate, and Penn State ended up finishing on top. And then Tom Allen, a former head coach in the Big Ten. And Penn State, I've already made this point, Brandon, has key players, or I should say players returning at key positions. So forget who the players are for just a moment. You have your starting quarterback back, 2 starting running backs, your co-starters, who are very good all-conference type of players, and I think have all-America type of potential. For all the criticism that the wide receivers have had, the veterans, they're all coming back. So those are guys that are consistent in the locker room, and then what we've talked about on defense here. So Pro Football Focus has Penn State 8. I was surprised at that, because personally, I would not put Penn State inside the top 10 at this point, because I still think they have a lot to prove. They beat up on weaker opponents, but when it came to that top tier of football, there still felt too much. It wasn't like it came down to 1 or 2 plays. Ohio State felt like that game felt like Penn State was still too far behind. Same thing with Michigan, always just kind of playing catch up. And I know if the ball bounced a different way against the Buckeyes, maybe they win that game, but you can only bank on that so much. So I would put them in the top 15, maybe 12th or 13th, because there are a lot of good other teams returning players and coaches. But when I look at the Big Ten as well, Drew Aller's coming back. Penn State has a starting quarterback returning. Oregon does not. USC does not. Washington does not. UCLA had a quarterback competition, so a consistent starter's not coming back. We don't know about J.J. McCarthy in Michigan. Ohio State has a new quarterback. So you get my point that Penn State has consistency at the main position that makes football teams go in this age of football, as you know, and all those other powerhouses do not.
Yeah, and I think that's what, there's people that place us higher in the top 10, 8, 7. I think that's what they see. And it's partially the potential, because it's, like you said, we're comparing this to Ohio State, Michigan, fell short, not quite there to get those guys, but it almost doesn't seem like it's a team aspect. Is more about execution almost. And obviously when it comes down to football, you don't execute, you don't win. You win, a loss is a loss regardless of how you shake it. But I think it's the potential of getting all the pieces in order, and just it's obviously everyone talks about it all season. We're not there, we're there. How long is it going to take? But I think the people that see us in top 8 see the potential, especially at the quarterback position. A lot of potential there, high regard for Drew as well. It's, can you go out there and make the 3 to 4 plays that probably separate us from being in the top, contention in the Big Ten and ultimately the country? Because as we've seen, the guys in blue, Michigan, that's why I believe, you have to take those losses with the, and learn from them, because that could take you over the top, mentally at least.
Here's the thing, looking back at these games in 2023, Penn State got better, right? For what it's worth. Penn State did take a step forward, because a rush defense that was, again, not reliable enough went to the number 1 group in the country in terms of yards per carry. And then you add in pressure rate and sacks and yards allowed per game. Penn State's defense was the best in the country, but the offense just didn't help them out. So you imagine, like you said, and I don't mean to just totally put this on the offense, but like you said, those 3 to 4 plays didn't need to come on the defensive side. It needed to come on the offensive side. That's why with my recent episodes, I look at this and it's like, how much different were Penn State and Michigan all along? It's Michigan just did things a little bit better. They got better as well. So you think the gap was going to be closed, and it wasn't, because Penn State got better, but so did Ohio State, and so did Michigan. And if you look closely, all 3 of them ran the same elements: 2 running backs, quarterback that protects the football, and Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State statistically were all the top 3 defenses in the country.
Yep. Yep. And that shows you, like you said, it came down to those quarterbacks making the right play or not making a mistake in the critical moments. And obviously Ohio State, they had the top receiver maybe in the last few years. Right. So that helps. You have an answer.
Yeah.
When the offense comes against struggle, you have an answer. And that's what I wanted to see out of an OC. Before the hire came. It's not about, the crazy creativity in the play. It's, do you have a simple answer to what your opposition is posing to you, And with Ohio State, you saw quarterback was able to get it to Harrison, and that's kudos to them that they were able to scheme things up, and he's a great player, so it doesn't make it that hard. Same with Michigan. They maybe didn't have a necessary, X factor on the outside, but you saw McCarthy, whether with his feet or his arm, make the right play to the right guy in the right zone, the right coverage, whatever it may be. And the offensive coordinators, they helped him out with that for sure.
The last bit of this, and I'm eager to get your perspective on this, is what the Big Ten will. We don't have anything to compare it to. Oregon traveling to the East Coast, Washington traveling to Beaver Stadium, Penn State has to go out to Southern California to USC. Now, I know they played in the Rose Bowl. I know that you played in the Rose Bowl. But that was at the end of the season. You had a month to prepare. And I know there's a full season, but now when you have a slate where you got to go as 20-some young adults, right? Young men have to do that now in the middle of school, not over break, in the middle of school. And then, yes, you get the bye week, but now then you got to go to Camp Randall. You got to go to Wisconsin. The Rose Bowl was easier in terms of travel because, well, that was it. Football season's over. We have some downtime. No, you got to refocus and lock back in. So that's going to happen both ways. The Pac-12 schools, former Pac-12 schools, are going to come to the East Coast and vice versa with the Big Ten schools. So we don't have any data. We don't have any prior knowledge to how this is going to go. So I look at this as an overall, like just a total free-for-all, Brandon. I expect Oregon, and we'll keep an eye on Dan Lanning with the Nick Saban news retiring from Alabama. He's going to be a target for the Crimson Tide, besides the point. But assuming he's at Oregon and Ohio State come to mind. I imagine Michigan's going to have a lot of turnover. We don't even know if Harbaugh's going to be there. So I would put Penn. Yeah, exactly. McCarthy, Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, any of them. I would put Penn State in just on the outside looking in. I'd say Oregon and Ohio State just because, but we don't know with all of the turnover that these two teams have had as well, that I feel like anybody could emerge at this point as far as the Washington, Oregon, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, any of them. I would just, if you look at talent alone on paper, it's Oregon and Ohio State, and then Penn State's not too far behind because of what they're returning as well. But that schedule is such a gauntlet. So anything could happen. Penn State could go 10-2, 11-1, or even 6-6 if the deck doesn't break in your favor.
Yeah, and that's when I think, or with this upcoming season, and as you said, the hectic schedule, this is where the coaching and, just mentality will come into effect. And it won't be anything we see, physically. It'll just be, that pro mindset, like I said. Something you see some of these teams, almost like a Nick Saban, like you said, just retired. But you saw that whenever you watch Alabama play, it was about business. And whether they travel, whether it was at home, and that's kind of the mindset you have to take. And especially now, I like to call it what it is. These guys are professional players. It's semi-pro, but you have to take it. You have appearances now. You're making money now. You have other obligations tied to this football entity. And that's what coaches mean is be a pro. And obviously, like you said, 18 to 22, it's hard. But this is where the coaching and the assistant coaches, everyone has to be locked in and say, hey, this is a business trip. We're going out to sunny California for business. And Rose Bowl, bowl games, you get a week, do some fun things, blah, blah, blah. It's not that. This is a regular week. This is about business. We can't let up a second because there's more sharks in the pool now. You know, as you said, Oregon, USC, these teams, Washington, these teams aren't just, you know, teams from the Pac-12. These are sharks that are coming to kill, similar to Ohio State's and Michigan's. And that's the same way we have to approach it, you know. So that's where we're going to see the big difference with this schedule. And I think these additional coaches, head coaching experience will pay dividends.
That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Again, check out The Pocket with Christian Hackenberg and Brandon Bell, our special guest on this show. Again, people say LeVar Arrington and Abdul Carter, you were number 11 as well, and were a captain on that defense when you played at Penn State. So, Brandon, thank you so much for the time, the perspective, and can't wait to have you back on again to talk some defense and Penn State football overall. Thank you.
Thank you, brother.